comment on your beautiful.
Oh, you know what? For our viewers' viewing pleasure.
Wow. Wow.
That is my background
Gorgeous.
right now.
Just
Yeah.
whatever happened to be behind you right now. Totally unprepared.
I know, and you can't tell at all unless I'm like not in the frame and it readjusts.
How is so you're kind of completed your first day. Did you get to go on some adventures yesterday?
I went. We tried to, but we basically went to a lookout and caught the view, which was nice. But it's been raining on an awful lot. Like there was a huge downpour yesterday, so
Mm-hmm.
we didn't get to do much in terms of like hiking and exploring or anything. Mostly just got like kind of lost and saw the downtown area a bit, which I think we're glad we're not living in. It was very
Right. This is like the tourist area of like Waikiki.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So cool. And you got
Yeah.
your car, so you can kind of wander around a bit easier.
Mhm. Yep, we picked up the car. That was another whole process, but dealing with like
Right.
insurance and all of the
Oh yeah.
hassle of getting a rental car.
Oh yeah. Good. And
Yeah.
how's the jet lag time zone stuff working out?
Pretty good. I feel pretty normal. It just feels odd that it's like 10 a.m. right now because in my head it feels like it's like the middle of the afternoon, but it's not.
Right, right.
But it's kind of nice because now like I don't have to actually eat lunch during lunch break. So
Oh, right. You're 10 a.m.
by the
Okay, so
time we end, I can eat lunch.
you'll be perfectly right. I actually managed to grab a little lunch break early. I
Oh
ate a
yeah,
little bit of lunch
hard
early. Yeah.
mango.
Actually, fresh mango. Yeah,
Nice,
with chili lime salt.
nice, nice, nice.
Yeah, look for the Li Hing Mui.
I
It's
know.
all over the
It's
place.
just some food highlights of our like food
I mean,
yesterday.
you can even get them at like I'm sure you've been by like an ABC store, right?
Um, an ABC store?
It's like the Walgreens in Hawaii. It's just kind of like a
Oh, I haven't really seen anything yet. So any
okay.
like, actual buildings besides the touristy area, but we didn't like go into shops or anything. But
Okay.
yeah, I'll try to find it. What was it called
Yeah.
again?
Li Hing Mui. So they'll have it on like dried mango or something.
Yeah.
I'll share the link again. This is the Wikipedia article. But like if you go to ABC, which it's kind of like I said Walgreens, but it's really more like a tourist corner store almost. I think it may actually stand for Alcohol Beverage Commission or something.
Hmm.
But it's the people who can. Here's Lori.
Oh, nice.
It's the people who approve. I think it's like a government sponsored thing or licensed thing, but it also turns out to be like a very tourist place. You can get like flip flops or
Oh,
macadamia
okay.
nuts and stuff that people bring
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
All of that is available at ABC.
Nice.
But also Li Hing Mui powder on top of dried mango.
Yeah. Okay. I have to seek that out. Check it.
So this is cool. So Lori's here. I think she was actually going to come join us because we were
Yeah.
talking to her. When was that? Was that it? Was that? I think Lenny's session was the last time she came by.
Hmm.
Yeah, and we were telling her to come by lunch break and hang with us.
Yeah.
So she's very prompt.
Yeah. That's
I'm
great.
impressed that she remembered.
You invite her up?
Yeah,
Sweet.
I'll just do that. So we don't have these multi-host features yet, but that'll be fun. I think we'll have that in production tomorrow.
Yeah, that'll make things a lot easier.
Hey, Lori.
Hi.
Hey, it's Laura, but
Oh, sorry, Laura. Okay. This
I know.
the E is silent.
Correct.
Laura.
Is that
So
a
it'd be
nickname for Laura or something, or Laurel, or is it just always?
No, it's a French name. So actually, if you were French, you'd say Laure, but I do not recommend that for non-French speakers.
does
So
it mean something in French?
it's just like Laura in French.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you speak
Reminds
French?
me-
I speak not really French. My parents are both French speakers, but my French is. If I go into a French immersion situation, my brain will hurt really bad for like 3 days.
Yeah.
Get back into it, but not really.
You mentioned that they're French language speakers. Are they French heritage as well, or they learned it separately? Or
No, both of them spent a long time living in France and sort of lived there off and on, and lived in Algeria. That's where they met. And I lived in Algeria when I was little. So.
Oh wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
How was that growing up in Algeria?
That was just when I was so small that the things I remember, like my babysitter and the dog and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I wish, Algeria, unfortunately, in my adult life, has not been a good tourist destination, but I'd love to eventually go back.
Right. Whereabouts do people? I've been to the kind of Morocco side, and I think we even crossed the border, maybe. But is there a major city around there that would be common to live in or visit, or is it more at the other side of the country?
I mean, Algiers is probably the most tourist-y place.
Mm-hmm.
Where I lived is so the situation in terms of government there has made it not super friendly to tourism. And there's been a fair amount of violence and, just unrest, I guess. And they've had like multiple sort of government changes and rebel wars. And so it's really interesting because Morocco, I think, has remained to be a tourist-friendly place, and it is very proximate, but Algeria, not so much.
Mm-hmm. Right. And all of the less stable stuff has been since after you left?
Yeah, well, I mean,
I
don't know how much you know about the history of Algeria, but there in the 60s, which is before my time, there was a lot of war because and before that 50s, 60s, so it was an occupied by the French, and then they fought for their independence, and so that was a big struggle in terms of like political stuff, and there was a lot of actually cascading effects. Like there was a lot of demonstration and protest in France as well. If you're a Godard fan, you can see some of it in these films. And then there was a period of time where it was a little bit more open to like my parents were doing development work through American Friends Service Committee, which is like a NGO kind of thing that helps people build roads and stuff like that. And then I think it might have been like the 90s or so when a lot of Islam, like more like extreme like there were some issues around like as in many places in the Middle East, sort of the proper role of people from like an Islamic perspective, and like how involved is the religious side of things in the government, and then people protesting crackdowns on that, and then just like increasing levels of polarization and violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm not an expert, so I welcome if somebody else has more knowledge about it. I'm not. Yeah, but I know that we haven't spent a lot of time there. My parents, they have still friends there, but it doesn't seem like it's a good place to go and be very visibly Western and.
Right.
Yeah. We threw you into like a world history.
Yeah. Just learning about your name.
Yeah.
So then how did you make it to California? What was your process there? Were you first US or came straight to California from
Well, I
there?
don't live in California.
Oh, you don't? Oh, sorry. I shouldn't assume that.
So I'm actually Canadian by birth, and spent most of my adult life either living in New York City or in Vancouver, British Columbia, and then now I live in Portland.
Oh, okay.
But I did work. I've worked in the Bay Area, so I've worked at 2 remote companies, both of which have leaders, and in one case an office in San Francisco. So
Right.
I spent a lot of time there.
Are
What
you
did you study in college and stuff? What was your like path into tech?
Yeah, this is kind of a long story. So I originally went to film school, and then I then got a degree in writing. So I was not planning to be in the tech industry, although I was always interested in technology, and I took web design classes and things like that. And then I eventually worked in documentary filmmaking for a while, and then I became on the business side of that, right at the same time that sort of streaming was taking off and was a thing. And so I was really interested in the kind of technical side of things there, and I got more and more involved in thinking about the economy of what would happen with new ways to distribute content. And then from there, I moved into tech because it was sort of a natural transition and product side stuff.
Did you work on the content side of documentary filmmaking as well as kind of this platform or business side, or?
Yeah, so I first started in producing documentaries in Canada, but
cool.
it's funny because what I've learned in life is that you often think from the outside that something works in a very different way than it does once you're in the inside of it. So when I moved into the business side, it was because I thought that it would actually let me have more impact on working with really brilliant people and doing creative work. That did not prove true, although I did get to work on, with filmmakers who were really amazing. At that time, and I think to this day, there's a really interesting tension between creative work and economic impact. What I love about kind of tech side things is that I work in UX and research, and I love that you can actually sort of understand what people need and help them. Whereas with creative work, it's very much like I make a thing and then I figure out how to get it out there to other people who might like that thing. But there's not as much of a relationship. I think that's kind of changing now because so many creators are having these direct relationships in ways with their audience, and the audience is giving them more feedback about what they want and kind of encouraging them with payments directly to them. I'm also curious how impactful, I don't know, I think that there's a limitation to how much data can inform you as a creator, if that makes sense. There's a lot of creativity that is really driven by just you have interesting things that sort of hit you, and then somebody else is like, oh, wow, like I didn't think of that. So now I'm really intrigued. And if you are like, what do people want? I'll make that, then it kind of goes the opposite direction. So
Have you followed this?
Talking about this yesterday. That's interesting. We were kind of talking about this yesterday in the context of this came up actually when you were on stage with Lenny. What's the negative 50 to 0 day plan of starting a startup? And how a lot of people kind of obsess with let's make a Google survey and get a bunch of data on what the size of the market is, and do people like pets or do they like blah blah blah, and figure it out from there. But in contrast, we were kind of riffing on how it's much better if, I don't know, someone who wanted to who saw an interesting opportunity in certain space just made a Slack group of 15 extremely dedicated people who've spent their lives in that space, and just have long discussions for months with them, figure out what the chords are and then go from there.
Yeah, I mean, so my a lot of my mind space dwells in the area of how do you uh, compare small communities and like more deep interaction with scale.
Mm-hmm.
I I'm definitely more in the small communities are valuable to me, and I think that they are valuable in a very different ways than scale. But I also am really interested in business and economics and things like that. So I think how do you translate those two is complicated. Like it's very interesting to me, and I love to hear more about what you guys are thinking with this project because it feels like there's an amazing thing of bringing people together and having these really interesting conversations. And the scaling part of it is mysterious to me.
Yeah.
So
When you say that, what do you mean? How scaling would impact the experience that we have with it, or did you mean something else?
well, like how what where are you going with it? I guess I've only just been in it. I don't
Yeah,
know the sort of master plan.
yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of what informed the idea to work on this is from kind of offline stuff that we were doing. That was, get a bunch of people together in a room and basically interview somebody in kind of almost a fireside chat style. But because it's a small room and everybody was like invited and there for a reason, the kind of questions and discussion that came from all the people who showed up were really high quality. Meaning people had enough context and they had enough. There was a certain decorum that we don't necessarily see in typical online communities. And so we're trying to figure out, are there ways to take the energy that we had in those rooms, but allow it to be more open to more people without sort of degrading some of the trade-offs that come natural when you do things on the internet is you get a very different flavor to things, and they've been explored heavily over, from PHP BB forums to, Reddit and what we see on Twitter, and there's a lot of examples. But I think they don't necessarily help people have the best conversations, and we think that there are better conversations to be had if kind of that same curation that works, in real life, kind of in person, can sort of be brought to work on the internet in a similar way.
How do you think of what you're doing compared to, say, Clubhouse?
Yeah. So we started this kind of series on Zoom, and found that there were a lot of the features of how we wanted to run shows that like Zoom supported okay, but wasn't like really kind of first tier at. So things like how we compose the video stream is like really important to us. Like if we have a featured guest, we'd like to give that guest a lot of prominence. There's other features in terms of how we moderate chat and how chat works that help us kind of keep the quality of discussion much higher than we might see kind of on the open internet. So yeah, I think there's themes of bringing people together that are probably in common. But I think the actual tooling that we need to accomplish the kinds of shows we want are pretty different.
All right, so is the chat actually moderated?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
The version we have up right now is, I call it like lightly moderated, but we have a better version that we'll be pushing out shortly. That's got a much more sophisticated moderation set of tools behind it that help us and help communities of people that we trust to be better participants in chat.
That's exciting. Yeah, I think there's something really. I mean, we've all been shoved into the situation of like a zillion experiences with different video
Right.
platforms.
Have you been an attendee at things, or if you created some yourself, or?
All of the above. So I was thinking just now if I was on a panel that was done by an Aspen Institute and some other collaborators with them, and there was the first day. It was a Zoom web with the chat. I think it was a webinar with chat, and so it wasn't like everybody was visible type of Zoom, but it was webinar style. However, in the very first day of this conference, somebody just like was inappropriate in that chat, and so their solution was to cut off chat entirely, which in Zoom basically makes a webinar is just like watching YouTube. It's kind of terrible. So that was really interesting, and I think that there's clearly a need.
Yeah, I was gonna say we had the exact same experience as we were, hosting sessions, even on a fairly small scale. When you sort of open things up and make it available to more people, you end up with, I think most people are, well-intentioned and showing up for the right reasons, but you get one person who spoils it, and you need to have like better tooling to really be able to manage that well. Yeah. So we had a similar experience to what you're describing. And so it's one of the driving forces that drove the design of what we're building here.
Cool.
Yeah.
So did you actually, my impression, but it could be very ill-informed, was that there's a bit of a pivot from what you were doing originally to sort of focusing more on the platform side of things. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So the initial kind of offline experience was kind of before we started building anything. And one of the first things that we started building was really trying to assemble communities around book clubs. And the thinking there is, in addition to running those offline things, we were running book clubs like on Telegram, and it had kind of some of the similar curation assembly of people. But there were a bunch of reasons that like the tooling to make those book clubs work was pretty ineffective. And one of them was the idea that like to pull passages out of books was challenging. And the passages from books are what instigated a lot of the discussions around the book club. So kind of the initial starting point was that we had this OCR highlighter that let you use your phone to scan a passage from a book, OCR it, and contribute that passage to a community of other people who are interested in that book. And so that was something that we were pursuing a lot. And there were a lot of people who loved the tool and used it a bunch, but it wasn't until we started hosting the Zoom sessions with authors that it was really clear that like that was where all the energy was. So
where's the tool? Because I still want
the OCR tool. Yeah, we've deprecated the beta for now, just from focus perspective, because we want to keep really focused on what we're doing. But yeah, the tool, it was useful. We used it a lot and found it, interesting, exciting. And I suspect that there's a certain context where we'll be able to bring it back and make it more part of this. But I think the highlighting idea, it makes sense across books and videos and podcasts and websites. And like, there's all kinds of things where we're reading or consuming long form media.
Just a way of like focusing discussion. But yeah, you could have people like highlight text together and read it.
It almost feels like it would be useful in a totally different context. Like I don't know if I would find it valuable in any way in this. Maybe it might be nice to have like we're talking and then someone's like, oh, remember this thing that I read? Here's a citation. But with the world of like personal knowledge management being so big, it feels like from that perspective, very useful.
Yeah. I feel like I've seen some people, there's a service called Readwise. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah.
They've built, I think they have primarily like a highlight importer from like Amazon or other sources. And then I think they may also have I don't know if it's a beta app, but I think they also have an OCR scanner. But I've seen that recently they've been, I think they've integrated more deeply with Roam, where you can pull that content in and then create some sort of like a map of all that space within Roam. And I haven't yet gotten deep into those communities, but they do seem like there's tons of passion, excitement, and interest in those. So that does seem like the kind of place where this kind of thing might be useful.
It's a really interesting world.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's a lot of things Lenny ended with, right? He was like, I read so much, but I have no idea, like, how do I recall something that I've read 2 months ago? And I face the same exact thing, especially moving around. Like, I just moved from New Jersey, like, to Hawaii, and all my books are still at home. So I literally spent, like, an hour just, like, frantically taking pictures of the pages that I had underlined and written on, because there's, like, no good way of recalling and using that stuff.
Yeah, so part of my work is research, and I've basically succumbed to anything that I'm using in that context I get on Kindle, because I need to be able to highlight. And I love reading books much more than I enjoy.
No, it's so hard to read everything online.
So I try to, like with fiction, for example, there's no reason to have it on a Kindle, really, other than they do have, the library has the free Kindle thing, so that better for the pandemic. We had, our library was shut down for a while. But the world, I think the energy in that personal knowledge management space is very interesting. I've been exploring it, and I'm so curious what it will, like, whether it will actually have an impact or whether it's just sort of a fad. Because it's sort of like an offshoot in a way of productivity. Like, people who are into productivity also seem to be interested in personal knowledge management. And my experience is that, as a creative person, that that impulse, the sort of promise of personal knowledge management, as I understand it, is that everybody basically can be a creative person, and sort of like the Commonplace book. I don't know if you're familiar with.
That's how DK and I first started talking.
That's right.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was the Commonplace book, and like all of these kind of Renaissance marginalia things that I was like super into at the time.
Yeah. So that seems like really promising. Like, everyone can sort of have their own perspective and be collecting this information, and then you learn from their experience of experiencing it. I feel like the challenge that we have today is a little bit more curational. So from a curation standpoint, if you are using these tools for that, it's really great. I don't feel Roam is oriented around that at all. It feels like the opposite, where it's like, hey, let's just throw in like everything, and then you'll be able to find it later by some magical interlinking thing. But it doesn't really help you to figure out what to keep and how to process that in some way. As more people, like if 40 people read a book, do you really need to read all 40 experiences of that book? Like, I think you're probably still going to find there's, I don't know, like people who that's a natural skill for, and people who aren't. So it'll be really interesting to see. I just found out about this thing, Devon Think. Are you familiar with that? So it is basically it kind of is a little bit like Roam maybe, but it's kind of like a database, and it allows for fuzzy matching of things, which is really cool to me. That's like much more exciting than Roam.
Is this the one we're talking about? Is devontechnologies.com?
Yes.
Cool.
The idea basically is that you put in these, sections of books, and you make your Commonplace book, but then later if you're like, I want to know about, I'm thinking about the fashion industry and how problematic it is or something.
Yeah.
And then when you look it up, it might bring something up about the way that our bodies decompose or something, because it will use sort of fuzzy logic to bring things up. And that seems really cool because sometimes those kinds of connections make metaphorical sense that can be a useful framing. So
that's interesting. I wonder how they I wonder what their logic is or how they do that, because that's like the beauty of the creative process in a human brain, right? You're like walking around and you see something completely random after you've been working on this fashion article for weeks, and like you end up finding a book about like, I don't know, space outfits or like the first trip to Mars or something, and then you're like, wait, like this is actually so similar in a way that it would be difficult if you were like, I'm writing about fashion, I am only going to read things about fashion. But I'm curious about how like they are handling, like, what logic do they use to kind of like bring other things to the forefront? That seems like such a human thing in my mind that it's quite amazing if people are trying it online.
I mean, they call it artificial intelligence. I think that it is, my sense is that it's basically allowing for things that are not direct search, but they are in the same like semantic universe to be connected. So something like, you know, in the case of like Google, if you search for, I mean, Google's, you know, I think part of it's that search is really failing right now. So that's part of why it's exciting to me. It's like, oh, I need something that's going to do this way, way better, where I can filter down what it's searching through. But I think it's also like, imagine that you were thinking of, I don't know, headphones. Then it might also bring in things that have to do with sound or things to do with the way that headphones look. I don't know. It's able to do a little bit more suggesting of semantically similar things.
Interesting.
It sounds like to solve those problems, I guess you need kind of a fairly open community contribution instead of just one person silo. Is that kind of how you're seeing it, or do you think that even with one person silo you can kind of accomplish this?
Well, I think that the way that they describe it, and I don't know, I mean, I don't know a lot about this. This is a new discovery. And also it feels like it probably isn't the end game of wherever you'd want to go with this. Like, it would be cool. My dream would be definitely to have something that did this in a community, or like you could pick the sources. Like, I find it so strange that there's not a service where I can select all the sources that I would want to search from and just have things from that. Why isn't that there already? Like, but in this case, I think it's just your own stuff. So you're taking those clips from books and just throwing them in there. And then later, 2 years later, when you have completely forgotten about that,
that's cool.
Just resurface it in a cool way.
Yeah, totally.
Are you familiar with the concept of the Memex? I shared a link to a Wikipedia article.
Oh, cool. Is that lit?
It's the name of a hypothetical electromechanical device that Vannevar Bush described in his 1945 article, As We May Think. Bush envisioned the Memex as a device in which individuals would compress and store all of their books, records, and communications, mechanized so that it may be consulted with exceeding speed and flexibility.
This sounds more like just like the stuff everything in my brain onto a thing kind of concept. In a way, I'm interested in how I don't know, how people are envisioning the retrieval process, like how directed it is versus like what you were saying, Laura.
Well, I think that, I mean, I think of this as being a really interesting future opportunity, because it feels like a lot of things that we're automating, it's great, but one thing you definitely can't automate is the experience of synergy or like synchronicity.
Yeah.
So
put it. Yeah.
It seems really like a cool opportunity. I'm not sure if it matters to that many people. I mean, I feel like part of my challenge with the world right now is that I'm in such a bubble of people who like to think about stuff, and
Yeah.
there's a huge problem with the inequity of our current cultural situation that I don't know, but like Rome research is a perfect example. Like, oh, let's put like millions of dollars into that, and I'm like, wow, is the use for this like really that large? It seems like somebody who's trying to work on, I don't know, some kind of like more accessible technology would have a harder time raising that kind of money. But
yeah. What do you think the like big barriers are in terms of making something like that accessible to people? I think about like, I don't know, like if kids in schools, or I don't know, at an earlier stage, if people start using things like this to organize their thoughts, then maybe it's something that people can grow into, not only like Rome, but kind of these associative knowledge bank type things can grow into using no matter what. Like it doesn't, not necessarily if they're like highly academic researchers who are reading like swaths of papers and need to distill, but maybe, I don't know, maybe like just
what I've seen in the educational system, the barriers are like so much further down the chain.
Yeah.
Just like whether kids can form sentences that are grammatical by the age of like 13 is actually like a surprisingly non-solved problem.
Yeah.
And if you look at the US, I think, there's like this 1/3 of people who are college educated and have vastly more of the resources than the other 2/3 of people who are in a situation where it's a struggle.
Yeah.
And the kinds of things that most of us in tech are working on really hit that first group and don't do anything for the second group. In fact, potentially are just making things worse and worse. And it's, I don't know the answer to this problem. I think I mentioned in the beginning that my orientation is around more connection. So I think that could help, because I think part of it is that we're just so divorced from each other that, and I don't think it's just political. I think it's like more of a, really like a culture separation that's so huge. But that is like it's an untapped market at this point. So,
do you think that the internet is like helping or hurting that, or agnostic to how it impacts?
I don't know. My sense is that people in the less educated category who access the internet are primarily consuming content, and or like using social tech, and so a lot of the other kinds of technology that we make doesn't even factor in for them, and so the internet becomes more of like a place where you are watching videos or listening to things and interacting on social technology that has sort of designed things to be more divisive and kind of keep you away from the kinds of, like, even being aware of all these other kinds of accesses to the internet. So I think we have, we've really heavily moved towards a centralized systems of the internet that probably make things worse at this point. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's a really tricky like ecosystem to think of, because you could say that people in theory could access like many more kinds of people than they could before, but the reality of, I don't know, we had a session once with James Williams, who wrote this book called Stand Out of Our Light, on the attention economy, and the reality kind of that you're speaking to being that like most people don't think to, or there's just like so much against, like basically like so many factors playing against you if you're just a normal person trying to escape the systems of the attention economy and like even realize what are other creative things that you could do on the internet when it's like, I mean, personally, I feel like so easy to just become addicted to Twitter or whatever social media. And
Yeah, and the other reality is that if you are in this, like in a different category where you have fewer like financial resources and things like you maybe don't have time to go like
totally
learning new languages or like things that you can do.
Yeah.
You might just have time to like go to work and then like check your Facebook and zone out on some Netflix or YouTube or whatever, and like that's it.
Yeah, that's where interesting. I think media also has a really interesting role. I'm curious about how you feel about this too, because you have been in like film and writing as well. But I often think about like one of the most powerful levers against polarization of different sorts being like the kind of, I mean, the choice that Netflix, the immense power that Netflix has and like what they choose to put as their top 5 shows, right? Like imagine someone produced like a top 5 TV show about some marginalized group of Americans that people don't often think about, and it could be just like a fictional drama or something, but I think like in that way storytelling has a lot of promise where you're not like trying to didactically like teach someone, hey, person who's like tired after your 9 to 9 job.
I think they are trying that. My sense is that the people who run content tend to be oriented around certainly like the huge explosion of BIPOC stories that we've seen is just awesome. However, I think that the consumption of media doesn't really solve, like it seems like it'd be so great because people would have awareness, but I look at the Social Dilemma, for example, which, I mean, it was really important for us because it's telling the story that we also want to tell. Mm-hmm. And people all were like, oh my gosh. But I don't know if it had really any impact ultimately on anyone's actual behavior. I mean, maybe a little bit.
I almost don't even think of that as the most important kind of storytelling, because for me, that's more like the didactic kind where it's like, this is really bad for you. And then you're like, oh, wow, I agree with you. But now what do I do?
Yeah.
Whereas I think more about like, I don't know. I think DK mentioned this series that I haven't seen. What was it? Little America or something? Kind of like showcasing unique immigrant stories and the American experience, or
like I Will Destroy You, I think is another one, or
I haven't heard of that one.
I think there's quite a lot of content. I mean, people have to want to watch it.
Yeah.
And it is, well, I live with somebody who just does not want to watch anything depressing. And I'm like, well, that pretty much like leaves out everything that I want to watch on some level because like conflict is the heart of any good story. I was just, I'll check that out.
I shared the link for Little America. I find we watched each one of them, I think, over the course of, one day each. And they are sort of stories of conflict, but they're ultimately uplifting and about overcoming the challenges. And, a lot of it is kind of an immigrant family comes with not a lot of resources or abilities. And then, through some good luck and hard work, usually they sort of uncover a path to success. I think the stories are really well told, but it doesn't feel at all like preachy. And I don't think it is meant to be like didactic, but it just helps you sort of see the world, what could be through somebody else's eyes.
Yeah.
And I think they're all, if I recall correctly, I think they're all true stories. They're like retold and kind of dramatized. It's not a documentary, but
there's that interesting research, which I hope they do more investigating this. So it was a research study that was then debunked, but the idea was that hearing other people's stories could change people's outlook on things. And then it turned out that it didn't actually have that effect when they redid the study, but still like a really interesting idea of like, if you can identify with somebody, are you more open to different different thinking.
Yeah.
I feel like one thing that I think has been a highlighter topic. I think that the emergence of sort of solopreneurialness is
Yeah.
potentially going to be a really interesting shift in potential. I think I'm excited about it because it feels like people, it crosses more of these borders in terms of who's involved in it, and there's a lot of sort of ancillary things springing up around it that kind of creates communities of people who have nothing in common from like a background perspective, but they really want to do something that's like helpful for other people, like coaching and things like that. It feels like really exciting that's happening. I feel like Clubhouse is kind of, I don't really get Clubhouse in many ways. As a user, I'm like, oh man, I've got to just sit here. Like no one else wants to hear this around me. Like, why am I listening to this? But just the conversations people are having, it seems really, really cool that there's a lot of people who are just like, I just want to share, like connect with you. And we're all trying to do this business and, very different kinds of people.
Yeah.
So.
I think it is empowering when, people can see more types of, like more flavors of success. I think if you sort of, rewind the clock to like, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, if you live in a small town, you can either be a doctor or a lawyer if you want success. And other than that, there's not really a lot of options. And then I think over time, maybe like, the idea of maybe some sort of like a civil servant or an engineer would also be considered different productive paths. But they're still fairly limited, to a handful of like named professions. And I think, as the internet has sort of connected people, increased commerce opportunities, and increased visibility of various forms of success, I think we've seen more people be able to get included into that. And I think we're kind of at a moment right now, which, is an even more dramatic acceleration of that. I don't hear a lot of talk about this, but it almost feels like it's like 20 years ago, you might have thought to build a product or service or company as an entrepreneur. And maybe today you could say this kind of solo entrepreneur or solopreneur concept that you're going to create content and you're going to find people who love your content, care about what you have to say, care about meeting other people who care about what you have to say. And that's actually like a viable career path and can expose kind of entrepreneurship and create a really substantial kind of professional contribution in the world, that can be sustaining. And I think, we're just at the beginning of that. We haven't really, we've only seen the tip of the iceberg and the tools are still pretty raw and broken, but you can squint and start to see it.
Everything happens. It's kind of like that Kevin Kelly technology wants to, has an opinion kind of thing. That
what technology wants.
I think that we didn't have video that was capable of doing a lot of things until pretty recently, like to be these kind of platforms. And video is so much more accessible than other. I mean, it's not fully accessible. Obviously, there are some people still left out by video, but not having to be like a great writer, for example, I think opens the door to a lot more people and is also more connecting.
And even what is a great writer? Because I think historically we may have said you have to go through this program, get this verification or certification, and be associated with this publishing or distribution house in order to be like a real writer. And I think those are gates that limit people's access. Whereas, certainly not everybody has an internet connection today, but like, I think I thought I heard a stat that's like 90% of the adult world or something. I mean, something much higher, you think 20 years ago, it was a relatively small hobby-like thing. And now it's basically, roughly everybody has some sort of internet connection. And I think by having that, it it can enable and empower people to even discover the fact that these types of opportunities are available. You could be a writer, and a writer doesn't have to only have gone through the gates, but you actually have direct connection. You can build audience, community, monetization, and I think we're just at the very beginning of that. We haven't really seen any of that at scale yet.
Yeah, it'll be. I think the Substack thing is really, really, really interesting. I mean, everything is there's all these surprises to me right now, because you're like, well, will people really pay for like multiple subscriptions of people's newsletters? Like,
right.
That seems impossible, but yes, it's happening. So,
right.
Yeah.
Actually, it's, what we did with Marco Polo is very similar, because last year we went to subscription model it's like a freemium. So parts of it got paywalled and went to subscription. And all of us were very terrified beforehand, because there's been no other technology, like social technology, to try to do that. And it worked out. And I think it's partly because there's like an inkling for people that the other ways, like the so-called free ways, may not be really what you want. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see this play out over time.
Yep. I think we sort of haven't been able to run the experiments until now, meaning just the evolution of the world. The internet kind of had to start free, and with those starting points, we come up with a bunch of different structures and systems that I think the first rev of those looked pretty good, and they were reasonable in many ways, which is not necessarily what you could always say about some of the way they've been optimized to the edge. But I think any system that gets created has like a lot of slack in it. Like, it's just, it's experimental, and it has lots of space where people are maneuvering. And in that, it feels like there's always healthy, opportunities to connect, and it's not in some like transactional optimized way. But then as the world progresses at anything, like early internet, early search engines were really effective because you didn't have a lot of monetization opportunity that caused a lot of people to, there's good actors, but there's also bad actors who get involved, and it becomes this cat and mouse game. And so now all these platforms, you were sort of looking at what does it look like 20 years later after every cat and mouse game is optimized to the hilt. And it's, it feels like we need to reinvent around totally new systems.
It is a hard problem, because I think especially when you're talking about situations like this situation is a perfect example, or the highlighter meetings. You don't want to make financial means the gatekeeping force there, and so that's a hard thing to negotiate. And at the same time, I think that the people who've been most negatively affected by the old systems of like surveillance economy type stuff have been people who were unable to escape basically that method, because they couldn't afford to not have Facebook or whatever it is, So I hope we haven't dug ourselves a hole that is too deep. I mean, I think just from a climate perspective, it may be too late anyway, but but it feels to me like we're like anything where you're exploring ways that people can share ideas and connect and connect personally. That is what we're built for. Like, that is the thing that humans need, and when we do it poorly, we make a mess. So
absolutely. What's been your experience or kind of feedbacks or any thoughts on the way that it has been playing out on these highlighter type sessions? Because you always come and ask such good questions and stuff, but curious to see like how those could be kind of better exchanges of thought and connection?
I mean, I love coming to them because, of course, people are having these really interesting conversations, and there have been things that I was thinking about. So it's super awesome. I think part of what I don't really have any great input here, except that I don't know who's in the room really, and I think my sense is that a lot of people kind of come from your existing networks, and so maybe they do know each other.
Yeah.
And I don't know how necessary that is, but it does feel sometimes like I have a lot of questions, but I worry that I want to jump in, and yet there's a lot of other people. I don't want to be on top of them, and I'm not sure whether everyone feels as safe to put things in the chat or come up and talk. And so, yeah.
Is there something that you could, suggest that we could do to better communicate kind of who's there, or more context maybe, or?
Well, the way that it shifted from being the little bars with people's names to the circles, that made it harder for me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I can share a little bit about kind of what was going on there, and hopefully something. I mean, we want to make it easier to understand who's all there, because I think it is, if it feels like something that you're just watching a video you could watch on YouTube, then I feel like we're failing. And that's the same standard we always were using when we were hosting those offline sessions, because a lot of people were asking us to put the videos, record videos and put them on YouTube. And we said, that's not what this is. So I think having some visibility and context on the people who are either, available to interact with is an important goal. And the tags along the bottom were not super effective at helping people learn enough about the people. You could kind of see a name and maybe recognize it, but it was harder to get as much depth on that person. So we broke it out into the separate tab, which is the participants list. And so on the right, you can click the participants list. And if that had, that scrolls down, if you had 50 people or whatever, you can scroll around and you can click on any participant and read their bio, understand more about them in a little modal that helps you at least get a little flavor, and you can go off and explore further.
It might be that there's a tutorial or something to send to you. I mean, I know I work with designers who are always never ever have tutorials. It should be so obvious, but I think when you change UI, it makes it very hard for people to just assume that they understand it fully.
Right.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
We don't see it here. I don't know if you noticed when you first showed up, you were right below the video in a little circle. So that's a section that we've reserved. We call it the front row. And it is a place where if you're just queued up about to participate, we invite you into that section. It's kind of like you would have in an auditorium. You'd have a space, for people who are maybe stepping up to the mic or in a line. So we sort of repurposed that position, but now the participants list is there. But yeah, all of these are complex UX things that took us a long time to decide on, and we'll take a new fresh eyes
about how to communicate them properly, because I think reducing that kind of hesitation or friction, or basically making people feel that they can trust the space they're in, and they are really welcome to ask questions and come up if they want, but they don't have to, and join the stream directly, because I think that's the magical part of it, right? When you can actually go up and start talking to an author or something that you might have read all their blog posts. So yeah, I think we have to think more about how to best communicate that openness and that dynamic.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a tension because, of course, when you're moderating a discussion, you really want to promote people who are going to make your guest feel like engaged, and so it is, yeah, like,
Yeah.
I think everybody this year got to learn about being on Zoom and, or being in video, and I think that's been very helpful for this kind of platform, right? Because now people have sort of understood some of those social mores and the dynamics, and I mean, maybe we should have backgrounds here, for example, like, but something that helps people feel like they don't have to be in the right place, or
it's a good point. Another one I'll share where we've unfortunately confused people because of our choices, is that people are so accustomed to this use case for Zoom, and when you go in a typical Zoom, everybody's streaming their video and audio kind of by default, and if you want, you can mute it, but the default is everybody's there. And in this scenario, it's closer to some sort of like a webinar mode of Zoom instead of the standard kind of group chat mode. So we have a lot of people who are worried that, wait, when I show up to when I show up to like watch, am I streaming my video? That can be surprising to people.
Yeah. And the actual, I think, probably it's just like a work in progress, but the interaction as the guest is super laggy. So it is like there's a moment of like terror, like what's going to happen now?
Do you mean like when you're switching into the live stream, like that transition point?
It seems like anytime there's like a overlay happening to interact with, and that it's very slow. So like I noticed before, and when I would tap on somebody in the bottom, what would happen is just like this screen would come up and it was not possible to really interact with it, but then I wasn't sure how to get rid of it. And then when I've been invited up, I wasn't sure like, well, what's going to happen when I say yes?
Right.
Like, am I going to be right on video, or what's going to happen?
Yeah, we need to communicate that better. That's definitely one.
Yeah, we've been thinking of adding messages like when you come in the room, like, welcome, you won't be streaming audio or video unless you're on stage, and like this is how you can request to be on stage, ask a good question or post something in chat. Or when maybe like you're being invited to the front row or live stream, to clarify that like you're about to join the stage and like make sure you're in a good spot, blah blah blah, just so people aren't like, am I secretly streaming myself out to everyone right now?
And the one other feedback, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it, is when you're on stage, then there's a like getting off stage part is also a little awkward. So it feels like maybe there's a way for the moderators to kind of help the person who's leaving the stage see like, okay, you're going off stage now. Like, thank you for being on stage, but like, no, we're not putting on stage anymore. So you don't feel like you have to keep your video on indefinitely.
Right. Yeah. That can probably be just like verbal cues, like, thanks so much, like moving you back to the front row or something. And then, that's helpful.
Yeah, I think we would try with verbal move to the front row. You can then still be available to come up if you have something else to say, but you can kind of be, in a sense, like waiting in the wings or kind of waiting at the microphone.
Yeah.
But probably more communication about these states and changes.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is, I think, and everybody struggles with this, I think, who builds products, is that people learn the UI of something else. And then if you do it a different way, it might be way better, but people are like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I thought I learned this wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'm going to jump off, but this has been so awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming by.
Yeah,
I'm glad we got a chance to chat.
Really fun to chat.
In a more casual context, too. Yeah,
come to Lunchbreak anytime. Every day.
I love it. So nourishing as a person who loves like bouncing ideas and an extrovert in this situation. It's like,
yeah, totally. I mean, that's what we do literally every day. So we just like start talking about some random article and then spend the next 2 hours being like, what about this? What about this? Like, what if someone wrote this? So
I'm 100% in. This is great.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thanks,
so much,
Laura.
Laura.
See you.
All right. Well, that was fun.
Yeah.
We didn't
I
even.
that she's like thought about the commonplace book and all of this stuff.
Yeah, a lot of
As well.
common themes. Was
Yeah,
it?
and I had no idea that she had a background in the arts like that. I always think it's super
Yeah,
interesting when people move between like the arts and tech or business.
I know. I wanted to learn more about the documentary production process because I feel like there's just so much, so much. She was even, alluding to the fact that like the stuff that we see
Oh
as maybe
yeah, I was
consumers in the
curious about that
documentary,
too. Like, what
that
is
there's,
there? I wonder if that's one of the like very almost like old school industries in a sense that it's very like social ladder hierarchy determined is what I've heard from
mm,
some friends who are trying to like be in media and film, which
that
is bad.
film, just film and media broadly, or is there something specific in documentary that's more like that or less
Well, I
like
don't
that?
know about documentaries specifically. I wonder if that's a little bit better because it's like less lucrative in a sense, so it probably has less kind of rigid, like a less rigid totem pole, maybe.
Hmm. Right. I met somebody a while back who was she was a documentary filmmaker. I guess she was like assisting in she had worked on one film and then was assisting on a new one.
Yeah,
And the process of like how they got it all together and like the story and the
yeah,
research and it's such it feels to me like it's an apprenticeship model is the only way to really kind of
yeah.
break in. I mean, I'm sure there are other ways, but at least in the traditional kind of traditional film process, I guess you probably look at the incentives of like where does it end, and it I mean end meaning at the Netflix deal or the Amazon Prime Video deal or HBO deal is kind of the call it the culmination or validation that this like creative process had
Hmm.
some sort of outcome
Hmm.
that sort of gave it enough life. And I think within that ecosystem, there's the step right before that and the step right before that, and it kind of it's a little bit you know it's a little bit institutionalized, I think.
Hmm.
So it may be that like the internet um, equivalent you'd imagine that some of that must happen on YouTube already
Hmm.
today, right? You can imagine that there's other ways for like the internet equivalent of that kind of filmmaking process or the communities around that to come
Hmm.
together.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah, yeah.
I was thinking about uh, we haven't talked to James Yu in a while, right?
Mm-mm.
Because James was he was kind of going down this process where he wanted to figure out kind of how to be a writer, and he's
Yeah,
particularly interested in like sci-fi fiction.
yeah.
And he, my understanding is he had like signed up for a workshop, and he I think joined a workshop that was kind of a ad hoc, not super structured. I mean, it was a structured formal program, but it wasn't like you know it wasn't like this obvious feeder school to get to all the next steps. It was kind of more like learning for learning's sake, meet other interesting people. And I think that ended up connecting him to a few pretty prominent, notable sci-fi authors who he kept in touch with, who then, he had when he was running the short story club, sort of had built out some network there and was able to find some interesting, people who had given him feedback on some of his work. So, I mean, James has, he dedicates a lot of time to it. So he is able to break through, but you can imagine there should be something like a Y Combinator for fiction writers or sci-fi fiction writers or
Hmm.
writers in general. Those types of institutions probably would have similar enabling kind of empowerment forces that the Y Combinator for startups had and
Yeah, yeah.
has. So yeah, almost any uh, any market like this seems like it should any creative market like this seems like it should be able to
Yeah,
empower a new set of
definitely.
players.
Yeah, that's where some of On Deck stuff is kind of interesting. Like, I wonder if they'll start moving into more creative things as well.
Hmm.
Right now, it seems very like tech focused. I know they have their newsletter thing, but still, I feel like probably most of the writers there are doing like product-y type
Right.
stuff.
There was
But
a
I
tweet.
mean, one challenge is just that like charging people like $1,000 to that's a big deterrent probably for the people who can pay it. I'm sure they find like good community. But
Right.
you could imagine people just organizing like YouTube creator collectives or something where you just have
Yeah.
like mini assignments or something. You're like, all right, everyone make a short film about an interesting
Yeah.
librarian in your neighborhood or like an
Yeah.
interesting immigrant story or whatever it is, and then like everyone comes together and like reviews their own stuff. It's like just letting people create their own workshopping scenarios in a way.
Right. Yeah. I think Eric had tweeted something like Y Combinator for everything like a few years ago, and I that one stuck in my mind because I thought I think it's a super interesting concept. And when thinking about it, I think like the kind of X for Y analogy often those ones often run thin if you don't really understand what it is you're building. So maybe that like the Y Combinator for creatives or writers or whatever doesn't look exactly the same. It's not like dollar amount for equity percentage, demo day, launch you into success, but
Mm-hmm.
it's some other like community workshop processes, and maybe it's over a time period, and there's probably some
Yeah,
financial deal that sustains the community to empower the community to do
yeah,
more if there are winners that can succeed out of that process. Um, but it seems like you could rethink, almost any. I guess like what are the main features of a Y Combinator for X? I think you need to
yeah.
have.
Giving someone a sense of financial stability and community in terms of other people working on similar things. Like,
Mhm.
I guess monetary and people resources in exchange for some upside if they succeed.
Right. Yeah. And I guess like the nature of the program has to really serve the nature of the outcomes. So, it's kind of I mean, you get in trouble if you tried to, meaning it wouldn't work if you tried to do Y Combinator for, software engineering talent to create, to educate software engineering talent. But Lambda School actually is functionally very similar to Y Combinator,
Yeah,
but it's a different set of incentives. And so it's a different deal and a different process.
yeah,
But there's a ton in common between those orgs, but there's very, very important distinctions, and they didn't just run the Y Combinator playbook in a different context. They actually built something that's very unique to that
hmm,
context in which they operate.
yeah. What are the most important distinctions? Because the Lambda School thing, I have seen sort of playing out in other like less white collar areas as
Mm-hmm.
well, like training for landscaping or like
Yep.
whatever, starting your own kind of like boots on
I
the
heard
ground
there's a
type
I heard
businesses.
there's a welders one
Oh,
that
really?
is doing
That's
really
cool.
well. I forget the name. I'm sure we can dig it up online. Um, yeah, I think the important factors, at least at a course grain, if I were to compare those, I'd say that the Y Combinator is going to have like a more of a power law distribution of outcomes, which would be in common with like a lot of what you might call just like creative project work.
Hmm.
So a startup, most startups, end up being worth nothing and lose all the money, and then a few startups end up really changing the world and having massive financial outcome.
Yeah,
And then, in the case of like training software engineers, if people, do the work, most people can be trained to be a software engineer. Some large fraction of people can be, and they have to have a good filtering mechanism and stuff. And then the outcomes, are more, less volatile, but
right.
maybe more bounded.
Not as much of an asymmetric
Yeah.
range.
And so
Yeah,
I think, if you did startups the Lambda way, or if you did software engineering training the YC way, you would end up, totally upside down on everything.
yeah.
But the abstract, if you
That makes
sort of
sense.
zoom out in the abstract, they're like taking on risk, they're pooling risk across a community. And investing in the success versions of that risk in order to, let's call it, educate, for one phrase of it, but sort of educate and empower,
totally,
and network people, right? Like, I think an important
And
part
what
of
does the investing look like? Like, it could be a stake in like someone's salary for the next 2 years, or it could be a stake in their company, or then people are talking about like equity stakes in individuals. But how do you determine, like, I think all of that is pretty interesting,
right?
And like how they will evolve in the least kind of extractive way that's mutually beneficial for both parties.
Right. And I think we're, similar to like the point from before, like I don't know the Lambda people personally, but my understanding is they're like, I have a sense of them through personal network. They seem like they're good people, well-intentioned, trying to really serve the mission, trying not to be extractive. So I think like everything, I think everybody would look at them and say, okay, maybe they have a few misses that get widely reported, but I think in general they're trying to do the right thing and run the program. But it's also like a highly under optimized space. So you can imagine that, like, fast forward the clock 10 or 20 years, and there's some like, huckster types who are kind of giving the similar promises but aren't delivering on them, and have a slightly different style of deal that's a little bit more extractive. And I think, in early under optimized systems, you don't have those problems. And then, often things go off the rails. So I'd want to understand, if we're gonna be excited about these models, how should we think about like where these models will get exploited by bad actors, and how do we sort of get some set of rails to ensure that the good actors get credit for being good, and recognize that bad actors don't have much space to operate.
Yeah.
So we've got.
I'm gonna be back in a minute. I'm gonna use the bathroom.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, you missed the big Bezos news.
Oh my god, what?
He is transitioning out of the CEO role of Amazon.
Ooh, when?
Q3, it looks like. Stepping down as CEO of Amazon, will stay on as exec chairman in Q3. Andy Jassy, AWS, will take over.
Wow. Do you know anything about Andy Jassy?
I've heard the name, and I feel like I have seen him around somewhere where he was active, and that might be either Quora or Telepath come to mind. That I may have seen him active there. So I think he's known as being kind of the AWS guy.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I mean, I don't know if you follow Amazon much, but AWS kind of is Amazon's core business.
Yeah.
You know, as much as we all think of the, you know, e-commerce
shop.
thing showing up at our door,
Yeah.
it's funny how that's like, you know, their consumer public brand, but really AWS is, you know, that's where all their profit is, and that's, I think, the thing that's like technology scalable. I mean, the commerce business is great too. So it's just they've always kept it. You know, the line, your margin is my opportunity. They've always kept it basically a zero margin business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, intentionally. Whereas AWS, I think, throws off tons of cash.
What did it say anything about what he's going to do?
No, I haven't. All I've seen is just a few tweets. So I think this probably was just announced after close the market.
Right now.
I don't know what all the implications are, and I haven't digested the news, but I guess we could digest it real time.
Yeah. Some breaking news on Lunchbreak today.
This seems like a big moment in technology.
What do you think like the top questions are going to be on people's minds? Because sometimes these like behemoths kind of switching leadership doesn't actually matter that much. It's like what really is going to change about the company's plan or business or communication strategy.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud now, riffing, but I think they're going to keep executing at the commerce business and keep trying to grow and be number one at the cloud services business. I think cloud services is probably going to be increasingly important. So that doesn't seem like, you know, it seems like, yeah, it seems like having somebody like Andy Jassy, who was so responsible for so much. I think Max is a no right now. But having somebody like Andy Jassy, you know, who's basically the leader of maybe the most important businesses Amazon runs today, probably means there's like double and triple down on that focus.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would imagine, I think some of this, like, you remember this healthcare initiative that Amazon, I think, was launching with, let me pull up the name. I think they were launching with like JP Morgan and maybe Berkshire Haven Healthcare.
Was this the Atul Gawande one?
Yeah.
Oh.
My understanding was that kind of, I think it's kind of shut down. Here's past 3 years, Haven explored a wide range of healthcare solutions as well as piloted new ways to make primary care easier to access. Moving forward, leverage these insights to continue to collaborate informally. So, yeah, Haven will end its independent operations Feb 2021, which is like now. So I was maybe overly excited, but I thought that the assets that Amazon would bring to, like, you know, they're a purchaser of healthcare services for hundreds of thousands of people, I would guess, that might be enough like buying power to shift suppliers and kind of create a new type of supplier who could be kind of maybe a whole new system. So I was, you know, I was enthusiastic when I heard that they were getting into this, but you know, I'm sure that it's not an easy task, and I'm not sure all of what they learned or tried or what worked or didn't work. But it seems like that's still the kind of opportunity that Amazon should be able to take on. Yeah, like what is Amazon's future? Commerce, web services, healthcare? Like, it seems you'd want to pick something big that could be, you know, similar in scale.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think this overall logistics thing, you know, I think they're just at the like tip of really. And I think the way, you know, I think Uber, when it was, I think, really having its moment, looked like they could be a somewhat disruptive force to the way last mile works. Like if you're getting a ride to and from your home, the car could also do deliveries, and it actually could pick you up and bring your toothpaste or whatever you ordered along with it. So I think that was like an idea that was attractive at a time, that like this last mile thing could be a way to reshape commerce. It seems like most of those dreams don't seem to be, you know, in the forefront of kind of the transportation network companies these days. Though food is like, Amazon's never really nailed food, and food, most people eat, 2 or 3 times a day, and I think we don't have great options to be delivered today, but you can imagine the supply side of the options for food becoming like substantially different and better over time. And that's another one that, probably, I mean, if there were like great, healthy, just prepared, food that I could have, for a reasonable price delivered each day, instead of like go to the grocery store, go shopping, go, prep the stuff, clean up, etc. I think there's probably an attractive value prop there that would be scalable to like, kind of everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like, doubling down on like logistics things that they haven't done yet. Yeah, Amazon Cloud Kitchens, Max is saying.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. Have you spent much time looking at the cloud kitchen space?
Not really, but I think that is a super interesting idea as well. Like, what have been the major headwinds to that in the past? Just like, is it more of an infrastructure thing, or?
Yeah, I think there's probably a bunch of different players doing different parts of it, and there's not really like a well orchestrated unified thing. And so, if you think about like the history even of food delivery, things like Seamless Web and Grubhub were kind of the 1.0 players in food delivery, and they were basically just like collecting orders from existing food service providers on the internet, and then collecting orders and dispatching orders and taking a fee on that. And in a sense, just doing the internet stuff well is challenging, and so they just did the internet stuff well, and they didn't try to create new food supply. And so they're only owning like a piece of the, it's like, imagine Apple saying like, well, to get started, instead of building the iPhone, we're just going to build iOS, and then hopefully people will adopt it. It's kind of a tough, if you only own one layer of it, it's tough to like really wrap a new user experience that's so unique. And so I think what's happened is that was the 1.0, then we see all the 2.0s, and that's, DoorDash is probably like, I mean, I haven't looked at all the details but of, financial stuff, but I guess DoorDash, would have to be probably pole position on this, and, or maybe neck and neck with Uber Eats. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Uber Eats is obviously big at this. Postmates had a role, I think. Were they acquired by Uber, I think? So they're all like present in the discussion, but they've again like they've taken a kind of new delivery network or distribution network, and they've again like partnered with the existing suppliers instead of like create a new type of supply. Ask Max actually the Cook Unity concept if he wants to write the notes or share a link or two, because I'm not familiar with that one by brand name.
Yeah, me neither.
But the idea of cloud kitchens is an attractive one, and the general hypothesis is that there's a lot of real estate that is available that could be transformed into a kitchen, and those kitchens could be structured to be integrated with distribution networks, meaning Uber Eats, DoorDash, etc.
Yeah.
And those kitchens could either be like first party experimentation, like we know that Poke is big, let's build a Poke brand, or it could outsource the experimentation of the specific brands to third parties, and they could just run like the real estate, technical integration, operations, food, raw materials ordering, and that was kind of what I think the cloud kitchens, the original cloud kitchens concept was, that I think Diego Burdikin was working on, that I think now Travis Kalanick, I think, is operating, if I recall. So that's like, I think, an interesting, player, but we haven't really seen all of what grows up on that platform. Actually, I'm curious, you must have seen this Mr. Beast. Is it the hamburger
like burger
chain?
join? Yeah.
So I think he launched that effectively. I've got to imagine there's some sort of, cloud kitchen infrastructure behind that, because they didn't build out. They couldn't. I think they launched 300 places all on the same day. They couldn't have, they couldn't have done that all on the same day if they were building out all those spots themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like maybe that was just a few weeks ago, wasn't it? Maybe a month ago, but it was very recent. And maybe that's one of the first, great examples of a cloud kitchen, kind of, seeing an end-to-end user experience on like a new brand that uses virtual infrastructure with delivery only to kind of provide a new end-to-end kind of cooking concept.
Yeah.
So Cook Unity I'm looking at. Did you read it already, or do you want to give us a rundown?
No, I'm just going through it right now. Chef to customer. I saw like at the beginning of the pandemic interesting things happening on Instagram where like bakers who were stuck at home were just posting pictures and like doing personal deliveries to people. And some of them were making way more money that way. They were like, wait,
yeah,
I could cook directly for my clients.
Yep.
But I'm curious about how this works and what the cost structure is.
Right. So this says Cook Unity is a personalized meal subscription service for busy people who want to eat healthily but are overwhelmed by what it takes. By making it easy and flavorful, we help them build better eating habits without making any sacrifices. So it looks like 50 plus independent private chefs, looks like they are basically like a meal ordering platform where they connect, and they also, it appears they have like the delivery side of this too. So yeah, it seems like this, something like this has got to work sometime. It's
hyper local food. Yeah. How it works. Okay.
I know, that's what I was reading. How does it work? It looks like they have all these chefs here that all have their own kind of, author of this, and here's the name of the restaurants and kind of these brands that they have.
How much does it cost? I wonder. They do not tell you.
Each meal comes fully prepared with simple instructions for heating and plating. So you get chef-crafted meals delivered weekly. So effectively, it's somewhat like, it sounds kind of like, the supply is maybe more diverse, but it sounds like the Gobble value prop of like, we provide you a bunch of stuff on a, regular interval, but not daily necessarily. And then you do some final kind of heating or preparation, but mostly don't have to do a lot of work, like heat, plate, and enjoy. It's kind of the tagline here on Cook Unity.
Yeah.
Gobble was kind of in this space, I guess, but so make dinner in 15 minutes. So I think the big question with something like Cook Unity in my mind is, is the variety of chef selection which they coordinate going to give a substantially different consumer value prop than Gobble can otherwise achieve by kind of running and doing their own supply. My guess is there is, a substantial difference. Like I would guess that you can just do, you just get like more diverse types of food and sources and recipes and all that. So like I think it probably is easier to be more diverse about food sources than, probably Gobble has somewhat of institutionalized rails around how they source and what they prep and what's generally interesting to enough people.
Yeah. Wait, what is the for that for Gobble? Is that a separate?
Yeah, Gobble's more in the line of like a Blue Apron. So it's kind of these like meal kits, but I think Gobble's value prop is like one pan, 15 minutes. So, I think some of the other ones like a Blue Apron, may have different amounts of complexity. And I think the core thing, actually Gobble, if you want, we'll start up history. Gobble started with something more like this value prop. And I think almost, if you want to call it like Airbnb for food or something, like a, kind of empowering independent chefs. But I think over time they figured out that the customer experience, and so the demand side, wouldn't deal with the additional complexity or cost or logistics or uncertainty that may come working with independent chefs, versus if the platform, itself, Gobble, could, source the supply, ensure a consistent preparation, et cetera, that was, a good enough replacement for a broad enough set of people's interests that
Yeah.
I think became the core business. Yeah, and I haven't followed it super closely, but that's my understanding. I've never actually. There was one that we used a while back. Mark Bittman, I think, had a vegan one that we used
Oh, that's
called
cool.
Purple Carrot. Was it Bittman?
Oh,
No, maybe it
I've
wasn't Bittman. I think Purple Carrot was
tried hungry. I haven't tried purple carrot.
plant-based meal. So we used to do this one. This was quite good, and I forget why we stopped. But it was fun. We actually learned a lot about various, alternative offerings and services here, because we really wanted to find something.
Yeah.
Purple Carrot was good. I think one of the things though that happens with these, Purple Carrot would have like great stuff, but then they sort of, you get the kind of phone it in meals where it's like, it's like they're doing like a root vegetable with rice and some sort of sauce, and you're like, they've kind of done this too many times.
Yeah. Also the pricing, I wonder, like, yeah, you can pay like $12 a meal and it's probably fine if you're a busy professional who can afford that, but
Right.
I'm sure there are ways of just like mass making in a local kitchen, like just like 30 giant pots of lentils, and then
Totally.
it can be way cheaper, because I do think like it's prohibitively expensive for most people right now, like most of these things. But then I think of like temple kitchens in India, or these places where they feed so many people like deliciously and cheaply and healthily.
How does a temple kitchen work?
It's not like a formal concept or anything, but a lot of places have, like, maybe for a community service, they'll have a day where they just like feed like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and they just have this like operationalized small staff, giant pots and stuff, and assembly line kind of cooking.
Is it mostly meant for like people who would be members or parishioners of the temple, or is it?
No, it's usually just for anyone.
Oh, okay.
There's also this nonprofit that is like pretty impressive for its scale. I invited Charles because he was thinking of writing a blog post about cloud kitchens and stuff.
Oh,
if you want to set him up,
jam on the blog post. Did you invite him? He looks disabled to me, meaning his invitation control. Oh, you know what? Yeah. No, it doesn't look. I think this is a bug on our side. Like, it's like I don't see a control for him. I have seen this bug rear its ugly head before. Let me share it on our internal Slack so we can fix this.
Should I see if he's on Chrome desktop?
Sure.
It's not like disabled. Here.
I shared in our private Slack, you can see the control is gone.
Mm-hmm.
I might suggest, I'll refresh and I'll suggest, oh, Charles just popped up. All right, something happened. Maybe it was.
Probably was Chrome.
Let's test it. Did you see, by the way, while you were gone, we were talking about the writing distillation lab.
Oh yeah.
Hey,
I'm so down. Hey, wow, nice bike in the background.
You texted me on my phone, and then I sent it to myself. But after I click the link on my phone, it says like, I guess I'm like in the room or something, even though I'm not.
Yeah. Just need Chrome desktop to get up. But no, I texted you because we were chatting about that blog post. Did you ever end up like working on it more?
Yeah,
it's like basic news, and then we started talking about Amazon food and cloud kitchens and all that.
It's mostly done if you want to read it. I'm still trying to figure out exactly.
We have a new format of show that we've been talking about.
We could read it right now if you want to talk
Should we
about
do a
it.
live reading?
Let's do it. Let's do
live
it.
reading and live.
Text the Google Doc link in this chat.
It's like a Shakespeare sonnet, you know? Okay. I have like 10 minutes, but maybe that's enough. Let's see.
I hope it's just a tweet.
Yeah, we've spent like definitely 45 minutes on a tweet before, so.
Do we all have permission to see this?
Yes. Yeah. Just don't share without permission.
Okay.
That's all I ask.
This is only live on the internet to anybody who cares, but we won't tweet it.
Oh, damn. I'll have to change the permissions after this, I guess.
Or we can just delete.
Soon I'll publish it. It's more that there's comments in there, and so you know.
Okay, well we're not sharing this with we're not sharing this session with anybody anyway. Cool. So,
but you can
I'll lock it
afterwards to like say something else, and the link will be gone. Okay, let's see.
I think it's I need to check. I was editing it late last night, so you never know what kind of edits I forgot to make.
So are we just gonna discuss real time, or do you want to
go through whatever you want?
Yeah, because you only have 10 minutes. So what's useful? Do you want to like shoot around some ideas that you're thinking about, or like what's still confusing or not? What's got in your head?
Yeah, I mean, the main conclusion is that 3P on-demand marketplaces, like, they're nice, but like we're reaching their limits. So
by 3P on-demand, you're talking like an Uber Eats sourcing from existing restaurants?
Yeah, such that the biggest cost right now is courier, and let's say that's like $7 a trip or something. To get that to like $2 a trip is like probably impossible without big changes. And so like maybe you could bring that from like 15 to 7, but like now 7 to 2 is like impossible. So okay, so you know if that's the case, like what's the solution, right? And the main thing I identify is batching. So you know you're paying for a courier's time, and unless we create teleportation, if you're like 2 miles from a restaurant, it's always going to take a courier like basically 15 minutes, right, on a bike to get there, and they have to pick it up and they have to drop it off. And so like there's fixed costs that are just going to be really hard to, reduce. So the only real option is when a courier is moving around, they always have many orders in their hands as opposed to one order. And so it's really hard to do that without some kind of change in how companies operate. So right now, they might force you to batch, or they might provide batching with a discount. So sometimes they'll batch you and they won't give you a discount. They'll just do it anyway. Most times they don't batch you at all. And sometimes they'll say, hey, if you order from this restaurant in the next 5 minutes, we'll batch you and we'll give you like $1 off.
Yeah.
Most of those just like don't have a huge impact, right? And so I think there's a couple ideas. You know, one is they all have to go from on demand to non-on demand in some way. So the kind of easy version of this is say, hey, whenever you order food delivery, it gets batched up to the nearest 15-minute mark, and all the orders get collected then, and then like we match all the couriers, and like you might have like instead of it being 35 or 40 minutes, it might be an hour, 10 minutes, but like we can consistently batch you such that we can give you like $2 off on delivery or $3 off. That's one option. The more kind of like bigger impact option is scheduling. So like MealPal, right? You have to commit by 3 p.m. or even Munchery had this. You have to commit by 3 p.m. to schedule that day. And so not only on food prep, but on batching and courier liquidity, you're basically committing to something that's much easier to batch. So those are like the two main ways. on the marketplace side. And then there's all these questions around kind of how can you reduce costs on the non-food side. I don't get too much into it, but like a lot of these things are related, right? So Meal Palette, part of its innovation is that restaurants are willing to sell something at a lower cost if they could make like 200 of the meal with no alterations and just and use their time wisely.
Yeah.
Right now, there's no real option for that on any food delivery platform. I think the other thing around batching is like, to the extent that more and more delivery goes into ghost kitchens and the ghost kitchens are co-located, then like I can order from a Thai place and my roommate can order from a Greek place. But if they're all like in these like large ghost kitchens that are in some part of the city, then you could probably send one courier pick them up, both of them. And so there's all these ideas, but like ultimately we just have to condition consumers in a way that they're not really used to. Like most people want on demand. It was a huge problem in rideshare that most people were not willing to wait to do shared rides. They don't like scheduling their ride. I think there's much more willingness to wait in food delivery. Like if you're waiting already 45 minutes, waiting another 10 minutes isn't a big deal. Whereas like for rideshare, waiting like 15 minutes when you have to go could be a big deal. Whereas waiting like 2 minutes is really important. So there's some of that, but like, yeah.
You're talking about batching on the kind of demand side and then batching on the supply side.
It all relates to, I guess, batching on the supply side effectively, right? Which is just to say that, batching on the demand side is more akin to like group ordering, honestly.
Right.
I think all of this is like each individual can like order what they want, but like we have to figure out how to make it so that one courier is delivering like multiple orders at a time.
Yeah.
Right. But I was going to suggest
you could have like both layers at once. I wonder if this has been tried where you have like a compound of ghost kitchens, maybe of like 5 major cuisines, and they have one thing each that they make every night and like pick your thing. Yep. You could have a subscription for the month, that there'll be like something that you like, but they just make like 500 of the same meal.
Isn't that Cook Unity or someone else doing that?
Oh, is that what they're doing? Max actually shared that in the chat earlier, but
Let me
we
check.
weren't familiar what that was.
Someone sent it to me today, but it's basically like you have one dish that a chef makes. You provide the kitchen for the chef. They just make one dish and they sell it on this subscription platform, and you just get that one dish, and it's somewhat cheap.
I wonder if there are other alternatives in the supply side that could help with this problem. Like, could you, there was a pizza robot truck. Do you remember this one?
Forget
the name of it. Oh, that sounds close.
Zoom, yeah, it is Zoom.
Is it Z-U-M?
Z-U-M. Yeah.
So I think there's something interesting there, which is, it reminds me of like the old school ice cream truck, but kind of reinvented for a GPS world, where a provider could, it's not a model we're comfortable or we're like accustomed to, but it might actually have like much better economics if like you're driving around and you just have pizza available and you get a ping and you're like, okay, 5 minutes from now, pizza's going to be available and I want, 2 slices or, give me a whole pie.
So 2 things on that, because it's a good question. The first thing that is the major lesson, maybe, people over-index, but the major lesson from Uber Eats and other food delivery partners is that people don't really care about getting food that quickly. They care much more about like having food they want. And so this is what Uber Eats initially did, right? Uber Eats had sandwiches in the back in like a freezer, temperature controlled, and said like, we could get to you in 5 or 10 minutes. And people are like, I don't really care. Like, I'd rather wait 40 minutes to get something I want. And so I think what you're alluding to though is slightly different in terms of food trucks. So there's a company called Zev that started by AliCorp in New York. And
Zev?
Yeah, ZEVV. I'm not actually sure what they're doing now because I think the COVID pandemic has made it difficult for them to execute on their original plan. But they hired this guy who's the head of Neapolitan Express, which is like a food truck chain in New York. And basically their pitch to restaurants was, instead of opening a ghost kitchen, instead of opening like a new restaurant, just use us. Like you already have the brand. You do prep off-site, and then you have everything in the food truck, and food truck is used, and it's strategically positioned. So like in Midtown for lunch, but then it could go to like downtown, New York during dinner. And truly like that's like, this is slightly separate, but I do think there's a way to solve this without effectively without any courier or batching, which is just to say that like massively deregulate food trucks. It's like one of the craziest regulated industries. Like if you made it so that like you go to like other countries, right? And so obviously like street food in certain countries is much more popular, but like there's an economic story there too, right? That like in Vietnam, there's someone willing to sell banh mi on the street because like they don't have to like go to the regulated place to clean their cart every night and make sure that it follows these rules, and like they don't have to buy a permit, and and so I can't speak for Vietnam specifically, but the point here is that you could overregulate this to death.
And it's one of the areas though where kind of kitchen health inspection regulation could be good, but food truck oligopoly kind of regulatory capture is bad, and I would try to distinguish the two of those.
I just think the kitchen health thing is like, do you really trust like the B or C rating that you see like on the New York City restaurant? Like in some ways, like people use it as an adverse thing, but like, are you telling me all the the A+ restaurants in New York like are all like super clean just because like they passed the check that one random guy showed up in? Like, I'm skeptical of our government's ability to do this. So I think you could have private sector solutions. I think like I think people can make choices for themselves about like street food in a lot of countries. It's like, you might get sick because it's a little edgy, but like what people choose, like what people like, and like seriously, we're preventing. There's another article.
I mean, Charles, it's just human life after all.
Well, I don't think we're actually saving anyone's life, I guess, right? I think there's private sector solutions to this kind of stuff
but I mean health though matters, right? Like
health matters, but you could
body.
You could also like vastly overregulate such that you're regulating things that don't actually change health, right? So I think like the rules for food trucks and cleaning food trucks and all this other kind of stuff seem, when I was reading about them, they seem like incredibly onerous and make it really difficult to operate. Like you have to go to certain like actual locations every night to clean your truck in a way that like makes it so that you can't permanently. So I just like
I'm more worried about the regulatory capture, kind of scenarios between the food truck park operators and the food trucks in the city. At least that's the situation in San Francisco. That I think it's
like the medallion industry with Uber with taxis. Literally, people own cart permits and they just give it to really poor immigrants who they'll pay like $2 an hour or something, and they'll make the money, and it's insane. So but there's massive demand for cheap food, and there's massive supply who are willing to supply it. I mean, a very simple example of something that's unenforced is that there's people who sell like mangoes and churros in New York City subway stations. Illegal, but they do it. There's people sell like hot, sausages outside of like ballparks. There's like all these little things that like people kind of get away with, but there could be like ubiquitous type of this kind of thing, and there's so many people who are willing to do it also, right? So the other thing, there's an article recently that New York Times had that was really interesting, and one of the things they talked about was Instagram pop-ups of chefs. So during the pandemic, they'll literally have one dish. They'll be like, okay, we're doing a pop-up here. We'll have 1,000 of them, and then they sell out and they do really well. One of the guys has a pizza oven in his backyard and literally just sells pizzas out of his backyard, and you just go to him like in the neighborhood, and like obviously all illegal, and people are turning a blind eye, but like why not? Like why can't I go? Like I'm literally allowed to go to my friend's house and eat their pizza that they cook, but if I give them $5, then it's illegal, right? Like
I think the challenge, just to sort of see the other side of it, I think the challenge is if people do it professionally, then it becomes like a game of optimization, and the way you optimize your margin. I mean, you saw this in Uber itself. Rides used to be, super clean and friendly and big cars, and it was like spacious, and then it kind of got optimized. So like everything is like, the cheapest car you can get, and people are just, everything gets optimized in a sense. And I think if you do that in rides, you still have a certain, you get to where you're going. Whereas if you do that in food and you have people optimizing, okay, let me buy the slightly cheaper, I'm going to source slightly cheaper X, Y, and Z, and you end up kind of in into a very different character of, and I think you could argue like, okay, you're going to like have reviews and ratings are going to solve this for you. And maybe there's something there, but I worry
What
that
about like Charles? Weren't you talking about models in? I don't know if you look more into this, like in Asia where it's not. I mean, like China where it's not literally street food, but also kind of the supply slash demand side has been changed to become like people are a lot more accepting of these kinds of things. People are trying more experimental things with the batching stuff you talked about.
Well, so yeah, China and some places are just much more head on batching. Like China is like much more head on batching. Just to come back though to DK, your point, I think I'm a huge fan of revealed preference. I think the lesson from Uber is that some people care about having like a nice car and they'll pay up, but like most people actually don't give a shit, and like that's fine. Like that's revealed preference. And I think with food, the same thing's true. Like we can be like, oh, you're only allowed to purchase like your $12 salad from this place, or it could be like, hey, like I don't know. I think it just gets glossed over. Like a lot of people don't have a lot of money, and so like
right.
They're willing to take that risk of this is a $4 food truck. I would reckon that like I'd be probably more comfortable buying pizza out of my neighbor's backyard than I would be buying like something at Chipotle, like 100%. Like
I would agree as long as my neighbor's not in the business. If the neighbor is like making a pizza and has an extra slice and I give him $5, I'm like,
what if your neighbor like we've outlawed any middle ground? What if your neighbor like every set like on this pop-up, right? Like it's like every weekend they'll make pizza, but otherwise, and they'll do like 100 or 200 pizzas that they'll sell, and he's doing it for some side cash, but also like he's doing it because it's not a full-time gig, and I don't know, like I'm sure there's a whole thesis I think here around like decentralized food making and such that abolish the commercial kitchen laws, make it that anyone can cook food, anyone can sell food to other people, and you'll have this. I would much rather get like Indian food from like a native like Indian mom who lives in like the apartment building that I live in. I just walk over and I buy for like $5 than I would like going to some random place in New York that I like. Truly, that's. Yeah. I feel like there's some underrated part here of like you can just use like some intuition around here and bet. But look, like yes, I'm not going to say here and say that like. I'm not completely indifferent to the health consequences, and I think if someone could convince me that there's no possible private sector solution, and like the health outcomes are so different. I mean, my heuristic here is that there's so many countries that have far less stringent health regulations, and street food's far more popular. And like you don't see everyone calling for like banning street food, right? Because they got used to it. Like it's so ingrained in the society to be like insane to kind of even suggest as such. And like if you're like, well, street food might be unhealthier. Could be like, you could get food poisoning, and people are like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. Like that's the trade-off we make. So I'm
just amped up about this. I'm not suggesting that we have the right trade-offs today. Yeah. Like I think almost certainly we don't have the right trade-offs. Like there's some things that we should evolve and change. I'm excited about a future where I could have, some, local living Indian auntie cook Indian food instead of going to the restaurant. That seems like exciting. But I'm not sure that I wouldn't say I'm very prescriptive about what path I think makes most sense. I think like total deregulation feels like a steep hill to climb from where we are.
You can have a couple things, yeah, like you can severely deregulate the commercial kitchen laws such that like if you sell below X number, then you don't need a commercial kitchen or something like that.
Which I think that happened with like the cottage food laws. I think have evolved recently. Which they're not really like kitchen dinner type things, but it's like pickling and dried nuts and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's maybe a step in that direction.
It helps, but they're banned from using delivery services for them. And two, it doesn't apply to hot foods and other types of like, just like most foods it doesn't apply to. It only applies
how does the concept?
Goods and stuff.
So another batching concept, and I don't know if you're okay on time, but another batching concept. We talked about kind of the delivery side of batching, and aggregating batching from the supply side. I was proposing the kind of roaming food truck with GPS a la Zoom Pizza. But I think there's another form of batching that I might suggest, which is could you have something that works on like a neighborhood scale shared chef who, like people hire private chefs. That concept exists. It's legal.
Yep.
It's pretty premium and expensive today, but could you enable a new class of people to, kind of aggregate demand to do batching in a non-commercial kitchen? But, like, could I find somebody who can be a private chef at my home, and then all my neighbors can also choose to buy from that person? And how do is there some way to like make the laws and the logistics around that work? Because I think if you have it, like, it solves that last mile problem in a entirely different way.
Yeah. So this is another awesome idea that I've thought about. I mean, part of the implicit benefit right now of this is that a lot of it's done under the table, so it's actually reasonably cheap. And like it kind of shows you, right? Like it's actually not that expensive to get a private chef relative to what you'd think if you can just split it with a couple people. I mean, in a basic example, right? Like I lived in a fraternity house and we had a private chef, and like
Exactly.
it wasn't the best chef, but like it was like super affordable for everyone if you actually looked at the math, just because like it's just paying one person to cook for everyone. And so it's I totally agree. I think regulatorily it's tricky, and I think
which part? Because like I think regulatorily it's not tricky to hire a private chef, is it?
I think probably a lot of the benefits are like avoiding taxes and stuff, and so I think
you mean like
to go through like
cash payments or something?
Yeah, or I guess like if you have a platform, then you have to like everyone's on the books, and maybe people don't want to be on the books, and so like it might be harder to compete with actual private chefs who are off the. I don't know. It's a good question, but yeah, I gotta hop. But man, I think there's like so many cool ideas here, and like
it's a great topic. I think there's so much to explore.
Yeah, I'm excited for this post.
So I posted. I mean, I tried to limit the post to like some topics, but I think I'm going to do another post on like deregulation of kind of like health and safety, and like what are the possibilities of like backyard cooking and things like that, and private chefs. And so that's probably a second post, but
nice. Cool.
Comments, thanks welcome to the doc.
Yeah, we'll read this and take a look.
Cool. But thanks for having me up.
Cool. Yeah.
Long time listener, first time call. No. But yeah, cool. All right, I'll hop.
All right. See you later.
That's fun. The other one that I was thinking about is I don't think we ever talked about the little food collective thing that Jen and I kind of instigated off Nextdoor.
No, was that similar to the private chef concept?
Except that it was kind of more peer-to-peer cooking and sharing. So this was back, probably, I don't know, 5 years ago. We went on Nextdoor and found people who were interested in this idea of having like a food collective who happened to be like in the neighborhood. And we kind of had everybody over and we talked to them about kind of this idea, which was like, anytime you're cooking, just, text out to this group. We just like managed on like a, iMessage or WhatsApp group or something, and like let people know that you're cooking tonight and see if other people want to join in or participate or, stop by and grab a to-go portion. And there wasn't like an expectation that like it was meant to be totally okay to stop by, hey, nice to see you. Hey, thanks for the food. And then, you didn't have to hang out and spend an hour talking and catching up.
How did people kind of like forecast how much they should make? Did people sign up?
Yeah. So it was just a small group of people. I think there were probably 6 or 8 people overall.
That's great. Honestly, with a lot of this, it's like, it's important, but also kind of funny to be talking about it like so in such a formalized way, because I'm almost like, just show up in India. Everyone's doing this anyway.
Right.
Like, we already know what works. Like, I lived in a co-op in college, and we just had a big house of people, and it was like 4 people's job every day to cook for everyone else. So kind of what you're saying, making that a neighborhood thing. Yeah, I guess the regulatory pieces have to be ironed out, but a lot of these things with like the shared private chef, I literally had that in India. Like there was a woman who would use one person's apartment to cook, and then everyone else would pay a slightly higher price than the original person. But there are very organic ways that everyone knows work. So like how do you just get that squeezed into the like hard edges of our system?
Yeah, yeah. How do you feel about the like, I guess, do you have any experience from, you mentioned kind of a couple anecdotes from India. Do you have any experience from how it operates in that environment that could help guide how we think about like relaxing regulatory stuff? Like how
Well, I was
anything to
going
learn there?
to, right before Charles came, this is a really famous nonprofit in India that does um,
Oh yeah.
nutrition, basically like school lunches, and like wildly impressive operation, very clean, hygienic, healthy. I'm trying to figure out on this website where they talk more about like how it actually works, but I kind of think about something like this.
Hmm. So this
And
is
this is
like
what I meant with like, what if there was a Chelsea market in New York, but instead of like all these little stalls for ordering, they were just what I said, you have like the 10 cuisines and the giant vats, and it's like very controlled, but
right.
let's see.
So it looks like these are like there's these happiness kit program.
Yeah, so I think they probably expanded into a lot of different stuff. The part of their work that I'm talking about is specifically the midday meal. So
Oh,
let's see if there's.
midday meal. This reminds me of, are you familiar with the Dabawala phenomenon?
Oh yeah,
Have you seen the documentary?
yeah, that's a really nice movie. I like it a lot.
Yeah, but that's
Midday.
kind of the midday meal. 125-year-old network that feeds Mumbai.
Oh, this is kind of interesting. Look, there are like papers kind of trying to optimize Akshay Patra's midday meal program, solving the logistics problems.
Wow, 1.3 million children in more than 9,000 schools in 9 states. Wow.
Oh, okay, there's a Stanford here. Maybe this might say a little bit more about how it works. Yeah, if you look at this kitchen, it's like giant vats. Like we've never
Mm-hmm.
seen anything like that for making rice. Like it would have to be a completely different operation that we're used to thinking about, like food making. But
Yeah, I like this. It says Akshaya Patra. The term means inexhaustible vessel in Sanskrit.
yeah,
Did you know that? That's pretty cool.
okay, this still doesn't talk that much about the logistics, which I think is very interesting. Oh, there's a video.
Wow, I'd love to see this. Do you have a video, you said? Oh, there it is. Okay. What an operation.
Yeah, which makes me kind of think like there's one thing to think in terms of how can we like help individual cooks sort of join a system and make the system work in that way, but this is sort of a different thing where it's probably like a big private funder. They have private and government funding, but say in the US someone comes in with like a startup or like a big pot of
Mm-hmm.
money, builds this like factory almost where you just make huge quantities of rice and lentils and like
Right.
easy things to just like mass make, and then maybe there's some customization going on, but you kind of it's almost more like a it's more like building mini factories than necessarily empowering individual chefs.
Yep. Yes, you get some like economies of scale on the production side.
Yeah.
I guess part of part of the thing, I guess, if we really want to understand this better, we should be more specific about some of the economic differences here, which is, I think,
Totally.
transport cost in some of these places, like Charles mentioned Vietnam, or kind of we're talking about India here. I think transport costs are substantially cheaper, for a whole number of reasons, but probably largely due to kind of the labor markets.
Yeah.
So, having a centralized at scale preparation thing with, very cheap transport seems to work well there. I think if we did centralized prep situation like this, but we weren't able to batch the distribution part, I think we wouldn't get as much advantage there. I think the labor side of it. Somebody was telling me, is it Rappi? Do you know Rappi? RAPPI?
Yes, in Latin America, right?
Yeah, I think it's basically like Instacart or Postmates for Latin America, or Instacart for Latin America. But I think when they first were explaining their business, it was, I think, did Charles quote the price being $7 or $8? Was that what he said for the delivery thing per order? I think Rappi was quoting something like,
was it
50 cents or $1?
Yeah,
for an average delivery. So it's, on the range of like an order of magnitude difference in cost. The distribution network itself, which, enables a whole different set of trade-offs in the supply side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It does seem like if we could have new supply that was more efficient and doing things at scale, that seems like a big unlock in changing a lot of the dynamics. Because I think the individual restaurants that we have today that provide much of the supply are extremely under optimized. They're optimized in ways that are inconsistent with the needs of today, like being on a expensive plot of real estate on a commercial street that's walkable. Is kind of where a lot of these restaurants exist, even though mostly we don't really care where they exist. They could be in like parts of town that are underutilized.
Actually, that's pretty interesting, because so much of the experience of eating out is really the experience. Like, you're kind of paying for nice lighting and like relaxing space, and much more so than the actual plate of food itself. But if you somehow divorce those, and cities have a lot more public indoor and outdoor spaces where people can gather, and then the food can all be in like some part of town that's easy to build like a bunch of these large scale kitchens in.
Yeah.
It makes it cheaper for everyone.
Yeah. It was pointed out to me years ago. I was kind of obsessed with this space and spending a lot of time trying to learn more about it. And it was pointed out to me that Yelp was a big innovation in the need for frontline commercial real estate for a restaurant, because it used to be that the only way you would get discovered is you go to like the city center and where all the other restaurants are, and you walk and all that. Yeah. And Yelp enabled the same restaurant owner to get a cheaper spot around the corner with much less competitively priced real estate, but still get discovered. If most of the discovery is going to happen not through kind of visual observation, but primarily through research on something like Yelp.
Yeah.
So I think that, that's like you call it like a micro example, but I think that same thing plays out in the world today at a much bigger scale. Like, I think about a district like, Fillmore District in San Francisco is one that is just, it's super premium real estate and lots of boutiques, and then there's lots of restaurants there. And if you want to go to a restaurant there, you're rarely going there to sit down and eat. You don't even discover it by walking by those same places. It just happens to be there. But built into that is real estate cost that gets built into the food cost and gets built into labor cost, because maybe labor, also needs to transport to get there.
Yeah.
So there's like a lot of factors that we kind of take for granted that are just not necessarily part of what we actually value today. They just happen to be kind of, vestigial, historical kind of aspects.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting. I'm checking out the rest of the article a little bit, taking a skim through it.
The Charles one?
Mm-hmm. So he says, I still think there's some building blocks to revamp the idea.
Yeah.
Sweet Cream seems to be utilizing ideas in their outposts in NYC.
Yeah.
I think the subscription idea is interesting too, as a kind of bundling or kind of, lower the volatility. It's effectively the example Charles gave of being in a fraternity and having a chef who's probably on some sort of regular engaged schedule with them.
Yeah.
Because I think having a subscription and the consistency of that means you get sort of a different relationship with the providers, or stability. Maybe you give up some choice that you might otherwise have flexibility for. But these are all ultimately information problems, right? Like if we had good information systems that told who wants to eat what when and who can provide what. These seem. Not every problem is purely information, but these seem like they're deeply information problems in ways that we just don't have the structures, and the topology of the world is not set up even to answer information the way we have it today.
I thought you guys were talking more about how the regulation is like a big barrier, because someone could build sort of matching mechanisms or things like this, right? But there's a reason people are doing it so informally, like through their Instagram backyard pizza kitchen type setup.
Yeah, I guess those are, I would categorize it maybe as two separate issues. One is the regulatory stuff. I think we were discussing mostly within the context of the food truck ideas, and I think food trucks do, the concept is, at least in San Francisco, has a tremendous amount of regulation around it, and I think it mostly is kind of protecting a few people who kind of medallion holder types, versus designed to serve the needs of the population. So
Yeah.
I think there's probably some flexibility that could happen in the regulation around who's allowed to operate food trucks and what is a food truck.
Yeah.
But then the kind of private chef, backyard neighbor chef thing is sort of maybe a different flavor, because I think that one is the regulatory around availability of food truck, and then the other is kind of maybe health regulatory, like what is considered clean and how do you do checks and stuff. I think the backyard neighbor thing would probably not fall under at least at a small scale. I think the health thing wouldn't be as much of a problem for the backyard neighbor thing, but I think you probably end up running afoul of some, depending on how you operate and market it. If it was literally just a few neighbors, I think it's probably something that works well for people.
Yeah.
We've gone over to friends' houses and we didn't transact money, but we prepare food, they prepare food. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other framework to this, right? Instead of trying to optimize how people can pay kind of abstract characters to make them food, whether that's a robot or some chefs in a ghost kitchen somewhere, the totally different approach is just more in terms of like hyper local community connection and like some of these things which are like houses where a bunch of young millennials can live together and
Yep.
do sort of co-opting themselves, or apartments where you have like co-living, co-working, maybe co-cooking spaces, like
Yep.
kind of flipping the problem around. So it's not more like how do we make buying food in like in that abstract way easier, but like fundamentally changing how we make our food ourselves.
Yep. That actually reminds me, I was going to share, and I don't think I shared yet. Have you seen the Happy movie?
Mm-mm.
This is great. If you get a chance, it's worth a watch.
Sounds like the kind of movies that I watch. So it's good.
It is the kind you watch?
This is, yeah.
Okay.
I hate depressing media.
Right. So, this says Rocco Bellic, director of the Academy Award nominated Genghis Blues, now brings us Happy, a film that sets out to answer these questions and more. The questions are, does money make you happy? Kids and family, your work? Do you live in a world that values and promotes happiness and well-being? Taking us from the bayous of Louisiana to the deserts of Namibia, from the beaches of Brazil to the villages of Okinawa, Happy explores the secrets behind our most valued emotion. The reason I shared it is actually dovetailing on a comment you were just making on like who prepares food and can we prepare food for ourselves, more communal places. One of the scenes that they share here, and I'll probably misquote the location, somewhere in the Nordic regions. I want to say like Finland or Sweden. There's an example of these families that kind of live on this compound, and it's kind of like a co-op. They each have their own space, but then they have a shared kitchen kind of communal prep and eating space. So it's not like everybody has their own kitchen. They all have their own, almost like their own apartment unit or townhouse unit, but it doesn't have a kitchen. And so everybody comes together and they prepare food. And I think there's enough families that they prepare once, they're on to prepare like one meal per month or a couple times a month. It's like, relatively infrequent given the scale.
Yeah.
And then every night you not only have like, freshly prepared food by your neighbors and people that you are also making food for. So it's much more of a back and forth versus like a kind of financial transaction. And then you also like sit at benches and you catch up with everybody and you meet your neighbors and you're sort of part of a co-op community, instead of kind of the more isolated style that I think is how people are operating today. I should figure out where this. Yeah, if that's your jam, you'll love this movie. It's
really that's good. Awesome. This was my co-op. I'm a big co-op fan. In college.
2 Dickinson Co-op. The TWAD? Is that?
2D. It was just the address.
Oh.
2 Dickinson Streets.
Oh, I see. So 50 students, and then because it's co-op, does it mean it operates kind of like I described, or how does it work?
Yeah, so there was a house where some people had rooms upstairs and there was a big kitchen, but you could be in it without living in it. So some people just lived in dorms like elsewhere on campus, but then they would come there to eat and like hang out and cook.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so cheap and like so good and had a lot of other benefits as well. Going back to, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about kind of fitness technology and like health, like glucose monitoring and food, right. Like all of these devices and stuff. But it's also like your health depends on who you eat with and when and how, not just what you're eating. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I recognize another name on this 53 beautiful artichokes list.
That's how we meet. That's how we met.
Is it? You met through 2D?
Yeah.
Oh, how fun. Is every member called an artichoke?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Who came up with that?
I don't know. It's been around since like the 70s when there were a bunch of just like random hippies who bought this house, like student activists in Princeton.
Right.
Started doing this. My friend and I sang a song about it. I'll send it to you.
I feel like there's also I don't know if it would be like I think this ideal that, yeah, it does feel like it was kind of a 60s, 70s communal maybe ideal. So I'm not surprised to hear that it instigated around that time. It feels like there's kind of like a reimagination of some of those ideals that are afoot these days. I think the band camp.
So I wrote this song, and then like my friend and I sang it together and recorded it. This was like one of the last days of college.
I'm listening to it right now.
You can listen to it later.
Oh my god, that's so good. I have a few friends who've been experimenting with kind of new forms of co-op. One of them, well, I guess maybe more than just a few, but I think a lot of them come out of like some of the ethos of what works at Burning Man, which is a little bit more collaborative and non-transactional. And they'll get a kind of a location together, oftentimes kind of in the woods and out of the way. I think they can like camp there and go up, and they coordinate when they're going to be there, but it's not necessarily their full-time living space. But I think many of them, have in mind that someday it could be, that they kind of want that, but are otherwise kind of attached to cities. And then there's one, did we talk about cul-de-sac before?
Mm-hmm.
So cul-de-sac is kind of a more structured commercial approach to some of the same desires, which is
we should chat with them actually.
Oh yeah,
we just texting Lava before.
Oh yeah, sorry, what is it?
Lava is like the GM or something else now, I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah, I was suggesting to Ryan that he should come on and tell us about e-bikes.
Oh yeah.
He could actually show us his collection. He's like an e-bike obsessive.
Oh yeah, totally.
He said he has like 50 e-bikes.
Yeah, he should. But yeah, totally how they're talking about this too, thinking about this, because I feel like I've mostly heard of it in terms of like car-free cities. But like the benefits of that are like fundamentally so much more about the community and the connection and the like local feeling.
Yeah, I think the
cul-de-sac. Yeah, we should get it on. We've talked about it a couple times. When was the last time we came on? I forget.
Oh wow.
I love these lunch breaks because I feel like I always end being like, the purpose of life is just to feel connected.
Right. Yeah, maybe I think there are certain themes that we keep returning to that maybe are, I don't know if it's top of mind for us or what, but this idea.
Yeah.
Maybe one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get RJ or what was the name of the woman you mentioned?
Lavanya.
Lava. Okay, yeah. And I think she's been to some of our sessions before. I recognize the name, I think, from somewhere in the highlighter ecosystem.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure.
Cool. Good. Yes. Amateur chef on Sundays.
She's a very impressive chef.
Did you see her Zoom background?
Huh?
The cul-de-sac Zoom background.
Oh, really? That's great.
It's like an e-bike, of course. A city for people.
Yeah, I'm texting her that she should come join Lunchbreak one of these days.
Did you read Phil Levin's post?
Mm-mm.
He wrote, I don't know if it was more of a personal post. I can't remember if it was officially part of Cul-de-sac or if it was more like a personal post. But I thought, let's see, maybe it's on Medium. Oh wow, yeah, he talks about 5 ways to get a loan when co-buying, group decision-making, and co-living. He's like, so he works on Cul-de-sac, and then he's been writing about this stuff and caring about it since before Cul-de-sac.
Oh, is he the co-founder?
He's founding team at Cul-de-sac.
Oh, interesting.
And something he has. Super Nuclear is like a Substack around co-living.
Oh, cool.
Did I ever tell you about his co-op house?
No.
We went to. Oh, he had this co-op house. He's now has some other co-op house, but he had one that was like in the middle of Hayes Valley in San Francisco.
Wow.
And there were like, I don't know, 6 or 8 people who were there who kind of lived there full time. And a lot who were sort of either tech or tech ancillary. So Eric Thornburg's his hip hop his like beat, what is it called? It's like beat battle things. Yeah, he does like rap battles on Zoom, right?
Yeah.
So he did those, I think, in the co-op. They used to kind of move everything away. But then he also did this one called Everybody Stand Up. And it's stand-up comedy, but everybody has to be a creator. So you have to have like 2 or 3 minutes of material prepared, and then you go into the co-op and they push all the chairs out of the living room, and you kind of sit down and form like a stage and audience.
Yeah.
And then you try your hand at stand-up comedy.
Wow, I love that.
And some of them are really good. Some of them are like they're all amateur, but they've done this many times.
Interesting. So Phil kind of piloted a bunch of these co-ops, and now he's working on stuff at Cul-de-sac. Thinking of I see these posts on co-buying and co-living and stuff.
Yeah. I think he's. I recall him having kind of one fairly well recognized 99 miles per hour is this like Medium publication that I think he was either like, or maybe that was the name of his, Why Self-Driving Cars Will Cause Sprawl. $1 trillion of real estate is on the move. Here's why. I guess there's only a couple posts. I thought it was kind of a bigger thing somehow, but I only see a couple posts here. I thought it was interesting. He references this tweet from Benedict Evans that says, I still think autonomous cars will create more billionaires in real estate and retail than in tech or manufacturing, just as cars did, which I thought was like an interesting observation. Because how people get from place to place informs the value of the real estate around it and what kinds of services people demand from.
What you were saying about Yelp before.
Yeah. So he had been writing about this stuff, and Benedict Evans, he quoted the tweet there.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
You should get one too.
Yeah. He loves to talk about this. He's like he likes to, like, anybody who's curious at all or wants to learn, he's like, yes, let me connect with them. I want to meet them. He wants to,
I would honestly, after COVID, I would love to move into like a co-op type situation.
Oh yeah.
Not only for the food aspect, but I mean, if I could find a group of writers or something to live with, it'd be amazing. But I don't know if there are easy ways of uncovering these besides just knowing the right people who are. And I don't know with COVID what the situation will be. Doing this in SF or New York or elsewhere.
Right. Yeah, post COVID, that'd be. I think we're going to see a lot of these, these kinds of things. It's something of a. We see the maker houses are more specifically oriented toward these. Towards kind of a more specific purpose, let's say, or like there's like a creation that you're trying to achieve and it works better when you do it together. I think that's like a more like an early indicator. But the ones that are like a little bit less structured, like we just have kind of common interests or common habits or common, maybe lifestyle, diet preference, whatever, may sort of take some of the learnings from the creator focused ones and bootstrap off that. When I asked Kavir about it, he didn't like it. At least not for this week's business.
Oh yeah, I remember.
It's like,
I mean, it's very complex to like you can't just like casually layer that onto
right.
your business from stay type operation.
Kavir, here's how to run your business. First, do something totally different that we think is cool, but we aren't ourselves participating in.
Or like with Amir before, we were like, you should just start this event series. We've already decided what it should be. Yeah.
Well, if I were the product manager at The Information.
Yeah, exactly. If you were the product manager of Cul-de-sac.
We have like our own meme.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. All right. Well, I have a few other things I want to try to get to today.
3 hours today.
Lunch is getting longer.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I ate before lunch today, so.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So my lunch break was. Yeah, it's actually running into your real lunch now.
Yeah, not too bad though.
Cool. Well, this has been fun. More tomorrow. Actually, we've got a guest tomorrow who's specifically joining because he has a writing piece, and we told him that let me get a link to it.
Editing?
Yeah, I told him about our idea to like live edit a piece and help make something better. And so he has put on his schedule, he cleared off his noon and he said, I'm coming. I want to do this.
Amazing.
So
should I just
already
not cheat, like not read it beforehand and like truly live, or like how premeditated is this editing session?
I don't know. It's up to you. It's up to you. I think I think you have a very unique talent at this, and you kind of the summarization and kind of brainstorming improvements and better structuring and stuff. So I think let that loose on the internet. It kind of dovetails on that discussion that I was instigating on Twitter today, where I was asking, does anyone remember the live replayable writing tool?
I just saw that.
That was obviously, I mean, where that came from, which was like yesterday's lunch break, right?
Yeah, we should reply being like, well, we're doing it tomorrow.
Right. So I shared the link in chat for the lunch break for tomorrow in case people want to RSVP to it. And then I also shared the tweet about kind of the thing we were thinking about, this live replayable writing tool. And so Mishti is going to help lead a writing improvement workshop with somebody who's written a piece.
Improv editing. That'll be my
improv editing
performance.
It's cool. You didn't even know that this was like, an interesting talent that could be shared with so many people.
Yeah. Well, let's see how bored people are tomorrow. We'll see.
All right. Well, with that, we'll close it off. So good to hang.